Are we good with the screen, colleagues? Can you see it?
Yep.
So good evening, everyone. As we wait for our participants to join, I'm wondering if someone could just type in the chat box. I want to make sure you can see our screen and you're able to hear me. So if anyone would just chat or put a yes in the chat box, that way we know we're all good. Great, thank you. So we'll give people a couple more minutes and then we'll get started. Okay, it looks like our participants are plateauing. So I think we'll get started. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We're really happy to be here. And if you're anything like me as a parent, having some of these things through Zoom hopefully is a little bit more convenient in the fact that we're recording this. If there's something that you missed or want to go back and listen to, we are recording tonight, so we will have that posted to our website tomorrow. I'm really happy tonight to have with us 3 other guidance counselors. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Heather McVeigh. I'm the director of the guidance department. And with me tonight, I have David Soulard, Julie Horner, and Kate Ryder. So on the agenda tonight, we'd like to really talk to you about some of the highlights around the college admission process. We want to talk to you about some trends that we have seen. This year, we feel a little more confident, or I should say much more confident in the landscape of college admissions, much more than we did last fall. When we were in the thrust of COVID, there was a lot of unknowns around the college admission process. And we really were in a very different position. It really shifted college admissions in the landscape. And so we're here to talk to you a little bit tonight about the trends that we saw as a department, as well as what college admissions officers had reported about what they saw last year in the admissions cycle. We're going to talk through the nuts and bolts of the application process, as well as looking at different roles and responsibilities. So what are students responsible for? What are parents responsible for? And of course, what are we as guidance counselors responsible for? We're going to identify a wealth of resources for students, many of which they are privy to at this point and have been utilizing really since last year. But we want to make sure that we remind you of those resources so that you can help your students navigate those. And then we'll wrap up tonight with some conversation around NCAA athletic eligibility and financial aid. For logistical, I guess I should have started with this. We are using the chat feature tonight. So should you have questions throughout the presentation, if you wouldn't mind adding those to the chat box, Ms. Ryder is keeping track of those, and we will formulate a FAQ document at the end of tonight and post answers to any questions we get to our website. We also will mail that out again with a copy of the presentation. We just thought, as far as timing goes, and wanting to make sure we had time to really answer thoroughly the questions you might have, that would be the easiest way to do it, given the Zoom webinar fashion that we're using. So we'll dive right in here to some trends. Like I said, last September, when we had this meeting for the class of 2021, we all, as guidance counselors and, truth be told, admission counselors, were really puzzled by what the admission cycle would look like due to COVID. And we anticipated, and it was proven, that students were in a position where they would be applying to many more colleges. Typically, we've seen in the course of my history here, students really apply to between 6 and 8 schools, give or take, a couple. But last year, I think we all saw students really increase that number of applications to probably 10 or 12. And I think the reason for that is the trend in this test optional, test blind policy, which we will get into in a few minutes. But most colleges, you'll see here in the third bullet, over 95% of campuses used test optional or test blind admissions last year. Basically, that was due to COVID and students not having the resources or the locations to take these tests. College admissions officers really couldn't penalize students for not having that opportunity. So they went to this test optional, test blind policy, and they found that it really worked. 75% of admission officers and counselors in colleges are hoping to continue that option indefinitely. What that means for kids is that they're applying to more colleges. They're no longer restricted by their SAT scores if they are not great test takers. Instead, they're using their transcripts in their essays and their recommendations, but admissions officers are really focused on the transcripts now versus their SAT scores. So that really proved to be the gateway to students applying to a far greater number of colleges. Anecdotally, I can share with you that there was a 17% increase in applications at the highly selective colleges. When I say highly selective, those are the schools, the Ivy Leagues and the mini Ivies. That's their percentage that they're reporting. And then something I learned today is that UMass Amherst received 42,400 applications last year, which to me is outstanding. Record-breaking for sure. And all the UMass campuses, the flagship campuses in the state of Massachusetts, reported record-breaking number of applications last year. So because of the lack of the SATs and students not feeling the pressure to have the scores to report, it did provide students the opportunity to apply to more schools. What we find, though, is that the yield or the number of students that the colleges were accepting were relatively the same. So the SAT was not as much of a factor, and which is why the college admissions are choosing not to bring back that SAT policy. The other thing that colleges are reporting, given the fact that many campuses were closed, is that demonstrated interest was a huge factor and will continue to be a huge factor. Demonstrated interest is any opportunities that students can showcase their interest in a campus. So whether it's attending in person or attending Zoom sessions, virtual visits, college rep visits that come to Franklin High School, which we'll talk about, anytime they can showcase their interest, that is being tracked more and more by admissions officers now, which was not as much of a part of the puzzle maybe 2 or 3 years ago. It is becoming more popular right now. And finally, colleges are looking to recruit more full-time students, minority students, and transfer students, as well as first-generation students. Interesting enough, colleges reported that they were really still looking for students to fill seats as of May 1st last year. So while more students applied to colleges, colleges were accepting more students because they didn't know how many would actually commit to going there given COVID and the unknowns. So naturally they accepted more students, but what they found is that not as many students were committing to schools. So they wound up having empty seats leading into the summer. And so for that reason, many campuses right now are in a position where their freshman classes aren't necessarily filled to capacity. And so there'll be more opportunities for transfer students, especially on college campuses in the fall. Other trends, we continue to see here that this process is much earlier. So early action and early decision continue to rise. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, the differences between that. But the process just in general has become a much earlier process. And that has been the case over the last few years, but in particularly last year and this year. The essay has become the most important soft factor. So we have transcripts and grades and scores. Soft factors are the other factors that aren't on paper, meaning academic records. So the essay truly has become the most important factor, and we really emphasize that with the students as it relates to taking time to do a really nice job with that. So it's an opportunity for them to showcase who they are outside of what's on paper. They have opportunities to write about the impact of COVID on them, something that's meaningful, something that college admission counselors can really glean from them other than how they are as a student. So that really has become the top of the priority list as far as a soft factor in the admissions process. You will also see recruitment processes where they are offering lower sticker prices, perhaps matching in-state tuition at Massachusetts colleges. So for example, University of Maine is offering in-state tuition for Mass residents. Other colleges, there's a school in Siena out in New York who is guaranteeing X number of thousands of dollars for students who commit to them. So you will see marketing opportunities for students as part of their recruitment process. And there's more wait lists, more wait lists, larger wait lists, excuse me, more than ever. Again, coming to that yield factor where colleges are really trying to figure out how many students, given the large number of applications, how many students will commit to them. And so they're adding students to wait lists in anticipation, they won't fill their class and they'll go to their wait list to fill it at that point. So generally a wait list is when students aren't admissible in the first round. They'll be placed on a wait list and they may not hear until June or July, but colleges are using that more than ever, given the landscape of where we are with admissions. And this hasn't changed in my opinion, but admission counselors are reporting that more than ever, they are checking candidates on social media. So we relay this message to students over and over again, but please make sure that whatever email they're using, it's appropriate. It's not an email they developed maybe in middle school. Make sure it's maybe simply their first and last name at Gmail. Make sure whatever social media accounts they have, either they're set to private or that they are posting appropriate things. I think this is the time more than ever that there can be some parental oversight around what they are posting on social media, because admissions officers really are just simply Googling students' names to see what pops up. So we want to make sure that we draw your attention to that as well. So those are some of the trends. There's lots of articles, reports out there. You know, but these are some of the things I thought were the most important to highlight tonight. And we're going to talk through some of the terminology here in just a minute. I'm going to turn it over to, I believe, Julie, you're next. And she'll walk you through the nuts and bolts of the application process.
Thank you, Heather. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to go through the application process. So these next couple of slides you can really use as a checklist for you and your student as you're working through the process yourselves. Something important to keep in mind is that everybody is at a different place in this process, and we stress this to students as well. It can be really hard not to compare to other students, but some students might be almost done with this checklist, whereas other students are just starting it, and that's completely fine. Counselors are going to work with students wherever they are at. So one of the first things that your student will be working on is finalizing their college list. So when they met with their counselor last winter or spring, they came away with a preliminary list of schools that they could start looking into. And hopefully over the spring and summer and now into the fall, they're getting the opportunity to go on college websites, do virtual info sessions, virtual tours, hopefully get out for some in-person tours as well, and really determine which schools they could see themselves attending. When we think about kind of finalizing a student's college list, we want them to think about colleges that are a good fit for them. And we encourage them to think about factors that might be important to them, like location, how easy is it for me to come home, the campus environment, the size of my classes, what opportunities does it have? So along with that, they also want to make sure that they have a good mixture of safety and target schools on their list. So a safety school would be a school where their GPA is above the average, so we're really confident that they would get accepted to that school. A target school would be a school where their GPA is right at the average, and again, where we think they have a good chance of acceptance. It's up to a student if they want to have any reach schools, so those would be schools where their GPA is below the average, or it's just a very competitive school to get into. So like Heather said, typically students apply to between 6 and 8 schools, but that can vary certainly from student to student. So once a student has their list, they want to determine which deadlines they want to apply for. So there is a hyperlink here that you can access later that goes through each of these, but I'll give a brief description of them now as well. Early decision is when a student applies earlier in the year, typically November 1st, and it is a binding commitment, which means that if a student is accepted to the school they apply early decision to, they are saying that they will attend. So it's only available, a student can only apply early decision to one school, and it is binding. So it's really just for a student who is 100% certain that they have a specific college they want to attend. So if a student were accepted early decision, they would withdraw all of their other applications because they are now committed to going to that school. So with that comes the family being comfortable with the price tag of the school and the financial aid package that they will eventually receive. Early action has the same deadlines as early decision, typically around November 1st, November 15th, but it is not binding. So a student can apply early action, but they are not committing to attend a certain school. So this deadline is really, it's not just an opportunity to get an application out of the way. It's really for a student who is confident with their transcript through the end of junior year. And that is because typically our first quarter grades don't come out until mid to late November. So they're usually not available for early action schools. So a student really has to be happy with the courses they've taken through junior year, the final grades they earned, their GPA when they're applying to an early action school. Typically students will hear back right around before winter break or shortly after winter break for an early action school. For regular decision, these deadlines are a little later, typically January 1st, January 15th, February 1st, March 1st, and they'll hear back in March or April. This is a good opportunity for students who want to have their first quarter grades as part of their application. If your student is taking a more challenging course load this year, perhaps they're taking more honors classes or their first AP class, and they want to show a college how they're doing, they would have that opportunity. It also just gives more time for them, if they choose to take an SAT or ACT, more time to do that, more time to ask teachers for letters of recommendation. So there are definitely some benefits for regular decision. Rolling admissions is when a college reviews applications as they come in. So they don't have a set deadline, they'll just review applications as they come. Typically, a student would hear back 3 or 4 weeks after they submit an application, and a rolling school will just review applications until they have a full class. So when your student has their list of schools, they figured out when they want to apply, they're going to be working on their college applications. The most common application that students use is called the Common Application, and it's accepted by hundreds of colleges. So it's really convenient. A student can fill out a couple main sections one time and send it to every school that they're applying to that accepts the Common App, which in a lot of students' cases is all of their schools. So it's very convenient. The Coalition app is similar to the Common App in the sections it has. It's just accepted by a smaller number of colleges. Typically colleges down south might use the Coalition app. If a college is not on the Common App and it's not on the Coalition app, they would have their own individual application that a student would find on that college's website. The Common App and the Coalition app, in addition to the main sections that go to every school, each school will have a couple of their own questions in as well. And kind of speaking to what Heather was talking about with test optional, it is really important that students are mindful of what they're writing for the school specific question. So a lot of schools will ask, why are you interested in attending our school? So we really want students to be thoughtful in their responses, make sure they're taking the time to answer those questions. If there are any optional questions, we always advise that they answer those as well. Another piece of their application is their essay, which Heather talked about earlier, the importance of that. They are working on essays in their English 12 classes, so they will get the chance to get feedback from their English teacher. Something that we've heard from college admissions reps is that they just want to learn more about a student, like Heather was saying. So what does the student think about? What are they passionate about? What do they do when they face obstacles? How do they work with other people? So that's the kind of information that a student can try to get across to admissions reps through their essay. Admissions reps also advise us, like, have students avoid cliches, don't write about the big game, make sure you're not talking about another person, the essay should be about you. Certainly we want the essay to be edited and reviewed for grammar and spelling and all of that stuff, but it's really important that the essay maintain a student's voice, because admissions reps can definitely tell when an essay has had too many hands on it. Some schools will also require supplemental essays. So in addition to that main essay, some schools will have their own essays they want students to answer. And again, very important that students are thoughtful about what they put in those essays. We want them to take time, make sure it's a good piece of writing. That's something they'll want to check early on in the process so that they can kind of factor those supplemental essays into their timeline of completing all of their applications. Added last year, there was the addition of the COVID essay. So that was an opportunity for students to talk about how COVID has impacted them. It's optional, so it's up to students whether they want to answer it or not. There's a link in the PowerPoint there that you can click on to kind of read more about the essay. But we recommend students answer it if they've been impacted by COVID in a more significant or atypical way. So lastly, when students are ready to submit their applications, they are going to most likely have to pay an application fee. This can range from $50 to $100, so kind of plays into the importance of being thoughtful about the college list, because that can certainly add up very quickly. Sometimes colleges will offer fee waivers if students do a tour or attend an info session, so students can always keep their eyes out for those opportunities. They're certainly helpful. We also offer fee waivers to students who are on free and reduced lunch. So if that applies to your student, they can reach out to their counselor and we can work with them around that.
Julie, do you mind if I jump in for 1 second?
Sure.
I wanted to draw parents' attention to the Common App. We linked a guide there, and I apologize, Julie, if you mentioned this. We've walked through really the entire Common App. So as your child starts to fill this out, we've given some of the answers and some of the some suggestions for how to fill out each part of the Common App in that guide. So I just wanted to draw your attention that that is linked here.
Thank you, I forgot that. So this slide is going to go over some additional components that make up a full application for your student. So in addition to the application itself, there are also going to be the requirement of having letters of recommendation. So typically colleges require 1 teacher letter of recommendation. Some might require 2. So for that reason, we ask students not to ask for more than 2 letters of recommendation from teachers. They will also get a letter from their counselor, and all of these letters will be sent through our Navient system, which Ms. Ryder will talk about in a few minutes. Something for them to keep in mind, if your student's applying to a more competitive major, something just to be sure of is to check if there's any specific requirements around teacher letters. Typically, colleges are fine with any core teacher, so a teacher from English, history, math, science, social studies. But sometimes for specific majors, they might say, we want a math teacher or we want a science teacher. So that's just something to keep an eye out for. So, other times students want to include outside letters of recommendation in their application. So a letter from a coach or an employer or a community member. And if they want to do that, they would just work with their counselor on how to get those sent out to colleges. And another piece is their transcript. So this is a record of the classes they've taken, the grades they've earned, their GPA, and their rank. This is sent through Navient, so it's important that students send a request in Navient for their transcripts at least 5 school days in advance of their deadlines. But what's most important is really that they're coming to talk to us in person and talking with us about their deadlines. And that's just to help ensure we're all on the same page and that we have enough time to get everything ready and sent out for them. SAT scores, Heather touched upon a lot. Schools are continuing to be test optional this year. So if a student chooses to not send their SAT scores, it is not going to negatively impact their application at all. If they do send them, it will just be considered as part of their application. So if a student doesn't send scores, it just puts a little bit more weight on the other aspects of their application, like their essay, like their coursework. If you come across the term test blind, that means that a college does not review test scores at all. We advise that students only submit their test scores if they are above the averages for a school. Otherwise, sending their scores is not going to add anything to their application. If a student does decide they want to send their scores to colleges, they'll want to check how the college receives those scores. So some colleges are okay with a student self-reporting the scores on their Common App, whereas other schools want a student to send them officially through College Board or through ACT. So they'll just want to check for that. If they do need to send them officially, they'll want to do that at least 2 weeks before their deadline, because it can take a few weeks for them to make their way from College Board to the college. So some last pieces of the kind of application process. As I mentioned earlier, Q1 grades are typically not on the transcript when students apply to early action schools because they are not available yet. With that being said, we will send Q1 grades to early action schools when they are available. And we do that just to cover our bases in case a college wanted to see them. So if your student is concerned about their Q1 grades being sent to early action schools, they can come talk to us about it. Mid-year grades are sent only by request. We'll share information with students when that time comes. So mid-year grades are their second quarter grades. And typically only regular decision deadline schools would need to look at Q2 grades. So we'll share that information with students as we get closer to that. For certain majors like dance and music and theater and art, there might be an audition or a portfolio component to the application. And it's really important that students are checking school websites to find out this information because it is really school specific. So some schools will require that students submit their application before they can schedule an audition or submit their portfolio. So they just kind of want to know what the process is for each of their schools. Interviews are typically not required, but some schools offer them as an option. And if your student is comfortable speaking, they think they could do well at an interview, we'd certainly encourage them to take advantage of that. They would probably continue to be virtual this year. It's usually with an alumni of the college, and they will just talk to the student. It's usually a conversation. The student can find out more about the school and ask questions. And I know Ms. McVeigh touched upon social media, the importance of that, just really encouraging your students to make sure their social media presence is something they would want a college to see. So I'm going to turn it over to Kate Ryder, and she's going to talk about kind of who's responsible for what in this process.
Hello, everyone. As Julie said, I'm Kate Ryder. This is just kind of giving a highlight of what your students' responsibilities are. And there's a lot of steps to the application process that Julie just went over. These are the big things that we really want students to be focusing on. So at the top, you can see knowing and meeting application deadlines. That's important for the obvious reason of if we don't know when we're applying, then we're not sure what we should be doing now. So if your student is doing early action, it's really important that they have already met with their counselor or they're meeting with them as soon as possible. If your student's doing regular decision, then we have a little bit more time, and that meeting could maybe happen at the end of October, beginning of November. Your students should be part of the Google Classroom for guidance. And in there's a meeting request form. We encourage students to fill this out, and it's an opportunity for them to lay out which schools they're considering applying to, both early action and regular decision, and as well as giving kind of a progress update of where they are in the process. Requesting transcripts in Naviance is something that Julie mentioned briefly. So this is another really important piece. And as she said, it's something that we want to do 5 school days before a deadline. So if a deadline is November 1st, your student is going to want to submit the request for transcripts by about October 25th. This is important because it gives us the green light to send the materials to schools. And so if they have a November 1st deadline and they're sending us the request on October 31st, we don't really have time to get our pieces together and send them in time. So that's another reason why it's really important for your student to be meeting with their counselor so that we're aware of their deadlines and we know when we can expect those transcript requests in Naviance. Another aspect of Naviance is a junior questionnaire, which is a survey that your student can find. It's about 10 or so open response questions about their high school experience. So this really gives us an opportunity to learn more about your student outside of what we learn when they're in the office with us or in a seminar with us. Because we're all writing letters of recommendation for each and every one of our students that's applying to college. And so having the answers to the junior questionnaire help make sure that we're not missing any big part of their high school experience that they want us to be able to talk about with colleges. And then finally, another aspect of Naviance is registering for virtual college rep visits. So Heather mentioned the importance of demonstrated interest, and registering for these rep visits is a huge way to exhibit demonstrated interest. And I should have corrected this, I'm just noticing it right now, but it says virtual college rep visits because last year they were all virtual. This year it's a mix of virtual and in person. So your students can register for these visits in Naviance. If it's virtual, they'll come to guidance and we kind of get a Zoom type platform for the rep to be displayed, and they can still ask questions because it's live. And then other times it's in person. So they come to guidance, there's a whole group of students, there's a live rep right there to address any questions, talk about their school, and it can be really informative. So all of those, I say, last 3 things are on the platform Naviance that we've mentioned a few times. This is our college and career planning platform. At this point, your student should be pretty familiar with it, If they're not, then they definitely want to have a meeting with their guidance counselor to make sure they're putting the pieces in place that we need for the application process. And then finally, the big role of your student is submitting those applications. So all of the steps leading up to submission of applications is really to support that end goal. So submitting applications is something that they can do on their own, and they don't need to like wait for us to be submitting our side of things. They can submit when they're ready, as long as it's before their deadline. And as Julie, I believe, mentioned before, the Common App is most likely where they'll be submitting those. Most students have most of their colleges being applied via the Common App. Once in a while, there's schools that have their own private applications or are through the system coalition. No matter what platform they're using to submit the applications, it's on the student to do that. Of course, if they have questions, they can always come to guidance. This is a set of 4 links that can be really helpful for your student. This presentation has been sent to you already, and I believe it's going to be posted on our website after this presentation. And so you'll have access to the PowerPoint where you can click the links. These links are also posted in the Google Classroom that your student has access to. So the first one's that junior questionnaire where they can answer some questions about their high school experience. The second one is an explanation of how to register for those college visits. The third one is just about updating their list in Naviance so we can see which schools they're applying to and then eventually send their materials in. And then finally, it's requesting teacher letters of recommendation Naviance. That's a really important step because hopefully your student has talked to teachers about writing a letter of recommendation, but the teacher won't be able to upload that letter until they've been requested in Naviance. So these are just some resources that you and your student look through when you get to those steps, just as an easy walkthrough. But again, if you have questions even after watching the videos, you can definitely talk to your guidance counselor. All right, so this goes back to that 5 school days I had mentioned. So when a student has a deadline and they need to request transcripts, we want to make sure they're doing it 5 school days prior to the deadline. I kind of already harped on that a little bit. We do mention it a lot because we want to make sure that we're all aware of when your student's applying and when we need our materials in. So this just gives a general guideline based on really common application deadlines. So if your student's applying early action, they might have a November 1st, November 15th, or December 1st deadline. And then to the right, you can see when they're going to need to request transcripts by. Important dates to note would be when we have vacations or long weekends. So you can see if your student has a January 1st deadline, that feels super long away right now, but they're going to need to request their transcripts by mid-December because we have so much time off from school and we're not going to be logging on to check our Naviance because we're going to be home with our families just like you'll be with yours. So we want to make sure that your students are requesting their transcripts with ample time for us to be able to send our materials in. Okay, this is our role. What is the guidance counselor doing in this whole process? We are really here to support your students. Anyone that works in guidance can tell you that fall is all about seniors. So we are looking to provide direction, support, advice, and information to them as needed. Students can email us, they can swing by the office, and we're meeting individually with students. So they may have met with their guidance counselor already, they might have a meeting coming up, and we are making sure that we are doing that for all students so we can figure out what plan they're having. And if it's a plan that requires applications really soon, then we might be seeing them a little bit more before that first deadline. If they're still in the beginning parts of the process and they need a little bit more time to kind of gather what they think they need to do, then maybe we'll have subsequent meetings a little bit more spread out in the fall. When it comes time to submitting applications, we will be sending transcripts, letters of recommendation, and other supporting documents from the school. So those are all official documents that get sent from our school that your student doesn't need to worry about submitting alongside their application. As long as we know where they're applying, everything should be able to find its place. But that's why it's really important that we know your student's list of schools of where and when they're applying so we can send that material. And then finally, what is your role? So as a parent, you might have a lot of questions. You might want to be really involved, or maybe it's just too overwhelming and you want to take a step back. And those are all very reasonable reactions. We encourage parents to be there as an emotional support for your students. This can be a really stressful time, so they might need someone to vent to, or kind of just like let their stress out on. And if you're able to be that person, that's really great. Also, reality checks can be helpful. Ms. Horner had talked about the importance of safety, target, and then also potentially incorporating reach schools. If you find that your student or your child is looking almost strictly at reach schools and they don't really have those safety and target schools, it can be helpful for you to step in and say, hey, let's see, what Ms. Ryder, what your guidance counselor thinks about this list. We want to make sure that we're going to get somewhere, but that you actually have a plan for the fall and that we're not just completely shooting for the stars. So kind of being down to earth with them and making sure that they're going to find a school that's a good fit for them, that they'll be happy in. Some students benefit from regular reminders, so you know your kid better than anyone. If they work best when they're left alone and autonomous, awesome. But if there's somebody that needs maybe a little poke every week or so, then I definitely encourage you to do that, because it's a long process and we want to make sure everyone's on top of everything. Honest communication is also important, communication with your child, but you can also communicate with your child's guidance counselor. If you just have a complete question about the process, you're not sure what's going on or who you need to talk to, what the next step is, you can email whoever your child's guidance counselor is, and they should be able to provide you with a little bit more direction and information. And that final bullet is a parent brag sheet. So all parents want to brag about their kids, and this is us asking you to do that. The junior questionnaire is a survey that your student fills out to talk about their high school experience to help our letter. The parent brag sheet is your opportunity to kind of do the same thing. So you can talk about your students' awesome personality, you can talk about their strengths, you can talk about their experience and why you think that colleges are going to really benefit from having your kid on campus. And we'll read those and incorporate your information into the letters we write to make sure that we're writing something really strong. That's about it. And I think we're going to move on to Dave Soulard.
All right, thanks, Kate. And thank you everybody for logging in. I've got a few sort of disparate topics here that I'm going to hit upon. To start with, we're going to talk a little bit about some options for students who may not be quite ready for a four-year college immediately after high school. And that can be for any number of reasons that we will talk about. But some of those primary options are listed for you here. So those would be our two-year public community colleges here in Massachusetts as a primary option. We are very, very fortunate in Massachusetts to have an extremely strong community college network and a really strong web of community colleges that interweave with our four-year state universities and colleges. So our two-year colleges, community colleges, most notably around this area, we've got Mass Bay, Massasoit, Quinsigamond Community College. Some students may go as far away as Mount Wachusett Community College or some others potentially, depending upon where they might be able to find residence. I know some students have talked to me about having the opportunity to maybe stay in a home on the Cape and still attend Cape Cod Community College for any number of reasons. So our community colleges are a strong opportunity for our students. They have a wide variety of programs that can be anywhere from 6 months to a year up to a two-year associate's degree program. So certificate programs at some of the community colleges for students that might be interested in healthcare careers, but perhaps aren't ready to take on a four-year college right away, maybe just want to dip their toe in things like EMT, medical coding, phlebotomy. There are certificates in business programs as well as interior design. Associates programs, again, for those medically inclined students, radiologic technology, early childhood ed, automotive, or then also multiple transfer options. So really, no matter what a student's interest might be, the community colleges can serve a really strong purpose. We're going to talk about both reasons why for cost effectiveness, as well as potential personal and long-term career goals. Those community colleges might be worth a consideration. Some other things that are on the table for students right after high school would be to think about some of the two-year colleges and technical training schools. So in terms of private two-year colleges, oftentimes these are places similar to Dean here in town or the New England Institute of Tech, where they have both associate's degree programs, so two-year programs, but also bachelor's programs where students are able to transition sort of seamlessly from perhaps an associate's degree right onto a bachelor's degree if they are thinking that that's something that they want to do, or if they find that it's something that they want to do after a year or two at that particular school. They offer a variety of programs as well, and sometimes they're programs that are unique and perhaps not available to students at a traditional four-year college. Again, things in the automotive, technical training, engineering programs that are really unique to some of those schools may be worth some consideration as you get a little bit further down the road here, narrowing down that list of schools. Oftentimes, those two-year and certificate programs can lead to really gainful employment. Students can have a certificate and be earning $40,000, $50,000, or $60,000 to start. So it can be a really terrific opportunity for students. And again, as I said, these are all programs that could lead to a transfer to a bachelor's degree, not only at those specific schools, but really to any school in the area or across the country where those credits that they have earned will transfer and be considered, so that they may do 2 years at a community college or 2 years in gaining an associate's degree, and then do just 2 more years at the next school earning a bachelor's degree. Reminder that that bachelor's degree is ultimately going to say the finishing institution. So again, if they were to do 2 years at Mass Bay and 2 years at Boston College, that bachelor's degree from Boston College would say Boston College only. It doesn't have an asterisk or note that also started at a community college. It's a bachelor's degree from Boston College, just like any other, and would open all those same doors and be considered with all the same weight. So for a lot of students, this could be a really nice way to get started. Why might it work? Why might it not? So at the community colleges here in Massachusetts, one of the larger detractors is that there are not dorms available on community college campuses. Now, that being said, over the last couple of years, as some of the colleges have struggled to fill their classes and fill their dorms, there are some opportunities around the state for students to dorm at a nearby four-year college. So for example, this year, there is anticipated that students who attend Mass Bay Community College may have an opportunity to live on campus at Framingham State, which is just a few miles away. This is on a space available basis. All of the costs associated with residents living and room and board are associated there. But for those students who are maybe thinking about a community college, but do want the benefit of living away from home, and you feel as though that's the appropriate move for them, living away may be a possibility at some community colleges. Cost is another factor, and we'll go into it in just a slight bit more detail on the next slide when we get there, but community colleges are less expensive than the partner four-year colleges, so that may be a reason to think about considering them. Certainly when you factor in the consideration of living at home as opposed to living on campus, that's another really large expense that you would be saving if you were to consider a community college, even if it were just for a year. And then lastly, we're talking about goals. So, I know that in this community and in many communities around Massachusetts and across the country, four-year college is sort of the frequent and common expectation, whether it's spoken or underlying. But for many students, high school has been a challenge. For students that are graduating this year, certainly they've had an atypical 4 years of high school. And for some of those students, the thought of one more year of education right now just may be too much, or the thought of taking on 4 full years may seem daunting. So for some students, perhaps just a certificate program, perhaps just part-time or taking some courses to remain in the active throes of studying and attending classes might be a reason to think about one of these options, whether it's a community college, private 2-year college, or a technical training school. One of the things I want to mention lastly before we move off of this slide too is just, for many students, they come through high school and it's later on sophomore, junior year, they realize, geez, the classroom learning is a challenge for me. It's something that I haven't really loved. I've been more of a hands-on student, and it just hasn't, that skill, that asset of mine hasn't been captured to its full extent. In the area, we do have a a school. I don't have a photo of it up there, but the Peterson School is a technical training school where students who have no previous experience in hands-on trades, anything from beginning electrical, plumbing, oil heat technicians, locksmiths, again, things that can lead to really lucrative careers, not just jobs. There are opportunities for those students as well, and we want to make sure that you are aware of those. And we would encourage you to encourage students to reach out to us if that is the type of thing that they might be more interested in. So moving on to our next slide, I said I'll be brief here because it more or less speaks for itself. And to answer one of the questions, we have mailed the slides out. We will be mailing them out again, and they will be posted to the school's website. So if you missed any part of the presentation, they will be there for you, and you can take a look at this on your own. Just a couple quick things that I'll draw your attention to. The numbers that you're seeing here are just for tuition. Okay, so if you were to attend a traditional bachelor's program over 4 years, tuition only would be about $48,000. So if you were to start at Bridgewater State and you'd go there for 4 years, your tuition would be about $47,000. Sliding all the way down to the bottom, if you were to complete a 4-year degree, you would get your diploma from Bridgewater State again, perhaps. But if you were a mass transfer A to B degree with the Commonwealth commitment, and I'll talk about that in a bit more detail here, but you would, instead of paying $47,700 for your 4 years of tuition, you'd instead be paying roughly $30,000 over 4 years for your tuition. So it really can be a considerable savings to consider starting at a community college. Now, what is that Commonwealth commitment and A to B degree? There are certain programs that qualify for that. Certain academic pursuits or majors that qualify for that A to B degree. And the Commonwealth commitment means that you would not only do 2 years at the community college, but you would commit to 2 years at a state university, finishing in 2 years. That's an important piece. We know some students do struggle to complete within 4 years. So you would need to complete your degree within 2 years once you get to the state university, and you would need to earn a minimum of a 3.0 cumulative GPA each year. Which for many students coming from Franklin High School, we stand by our academic preparation. We see a lot of our students do quite well when they do get to college. So I don't think that that is a bar too high to expect students to meet. So again, this is a slide just here for you to come back, take a look at, and do some more digging into the Massachusetts transfer opportunities coming from 2-year community colleges and moving on to our state universities. So transitioning a bit now to athletics, regardless of whether you might be thinking about a 2-year college, a 4-year college, here are some things that you may be thinking about. And we're going to talk about the recruiting process, becoming eligible for participation when on campus, and what that means depending upon what level of participation you might be thinking about. So for many of our students, we're fortunate here that we have a strong athletics program, and students are deeply engaged in their athletics, whether it's here at school or certainly through club and other opportunities that they have in the community. Many students may be planning to play a sport at college. They may have even had some communication with a coach, but we hear the idea that students feel they are being recruited, or that they are quote unquote committing to a school. And those are terms that are different and separate necessarily from the other term that's up there called the National Letter of Intent. So students are welcome to be having communication with coaches, and coaches can be having communication with students. Certainly that could be considered recruiting, but until a coach commits to a student in terms of a spot on a team or a financial scholarship for that sport, they are not really approaching what would be considered someone who would be signing with a school. So we would caution students and families around a couple of things. Coaches oftentimes will ask students to apply early decision. Well, if you apply early decision, I'll be able to hold your spot. That's terrific. But unless they have also promised a national letter of intent, which is something that a student would sign, which is a commitment to that school, and also a commitment of that school to the student, we would caution you about applying early decision to schools. As was talked about earlier in the presentation, early decision it's a binding commitment where you are agreeing to attend a school, and you will rescind all other applications. So again, as you go into the athletics process, go in with your eyes wide open that coaches at the end of the day may not always have your students' best interest at heart, but may in fact have the best interest of their team and of their school at heart. Certainly we would want students to engage in those conversations with coaches, but be careful about exactly what type of commitment they are entering into, whether it's through early decision or by signing that national letter of intent. Both are big commitments. Regardless of whether a student is being recruited or not, if they may choose or may want to play a Division I or Division II sport when they get to campus, they are going to need to go through the NCAA Eligibility Center, formerly known as the NCAA Clearinghouse. This is a process whereby they will create a profile on that site. We will then be triggered to send in their transcript. The clearinghouse will review that transcript, making sure that students have met certain academic standards, and then they will allow that student to be initially eligible to participate in sports once they get to campus. The eligibility requirements for Division I and Division II are slightly different. One requires more units. So Division I requires that a student has successfully completed more units of their high school education than do Division II schools, but both have a fairly high bar in terms of the number of academic units that students are expected to complete. The Eligibility Center also considers a student's GPA and their SAT scores. So I know we talked quite a bit about how SAT scores are optional in many instances. Last year, so for last year's graduating seniors, the clearinghouse did waive the SAT or ACT requirement. For this year's seniors, that waiver has gone away. These students are expected to take the SATs or ACTs if they wish to pass through the eligibility center. They could take those SATs or ACTs really anytime this year, though. So we do have some opportunities coming up this fall and even into the spring. So again, they would register at the eligibilitycenter.org. We provide a transcript and they continue to remain in communication with us, and we will send final transcripts when the year ends. The one piece of information that is perhaps most important to note, because the vast majority of our classes here at Franklin High School have been approved and meet the standards of the Eligibility Center. As you may know, English in a student's senior year, first half of the year they take a class called English 12, and second half of the year they take a course that might be called Art of the Film or Narrative Through Podcasting or something along those lines. All of our classes are approved with the exception of, and I wrote down the wrong one here, so Heather, if you can, I'm blanking on it, if you could help me out.
So all of the courses except sports and popular culture are approved, but that's in the works kind of as we speak. And our hope is that it is approved by January, but as of today, it is not.
I appreciate that. And that is in fact what I had in my notes. Not that it matters to anyone or that you necessarily believe me, but that is what I had in my notes, but I was doubting myself because I know we just got podcasting to be approved just a couple of weeks ago. So we are always in communication with the clearinghouse and working to get all of our courses approved to be at the benefit of all of our students. So thank you again, Heather. And then, so Division III, eligibility is determined locally in those cases. So each school will determine the eligibility. Students looking to participate in Division III sports do not need to go through the clearinghouse or the eligibility center. So that is not a consideration for those students. There we go. All right, so now on to my third topic here as we go through the evening, and I certainly am keeping an eye to the clock. I appreciate everyone hanging in. I'm sure I'm just now getting to the part that everyone is perhaps most interested in and finding out a little bit more about financial aid. So I will give sort of a short primer here on financial aid, and then we do have a financial aid, additional financial aid resources that I'll hit on the next slide. But the basics of financial aid, let's start with when am I applying? And that really can be any time now. You are going to complete, at bare minimum, the form called the FAFSA, the FAFSA, Free Application for Federal Student Aid. That is required at all colleges in order to get a financial aid award. It is open now. It opened up on October 1st, and you certainly can begin to complete that because it is going to rely upon your fiscal information from 2020. So you've got your full picture of your finances. You are ready to go and complete the FAFSA. The other form that you may end up having to complete is the CSS profile. That is available on the College Board website. So the FAFSA is the federal form, and the CSS profile will be a form that is used at select colleges. Not all colleges require the CSS profile, so you'd want to go onto that College Board website and check out the list of about 250 or so schools nationwide that do require the profile. The FAFSA is your link to federal money, and the CSS profile is your link to institutional money. They each are going to calculate your assets and something called your EFC, or expected family contribution. The FAFSA is going to do it in one methodology, and the CSS profile is going to do it using a different methodology. I would encourage you to use some of the calculators that are available on different financial aid websites to calculate your own EFC using the federal methodology and the institutional methodology to see what your estimated EFC would be. And again, that EFC stands for expected family contribution. Ultimately, that number will be calculated and then sent to the schools that you tell those forms to send it to. They don't send it everywhere. So you're going to need to go back to what sort of Julie was saying and know which schools you're interested in applying to, and make sure that each of those schools is receiving the appropriate form, the FAFSA or the CSS profile. Once those schools receive that EFC, they are going to then do some of their own number crunching. So to keep it quite simple, assuming a college cost $50,000 total and your EFC was $10,000, they would then try to come up with a financial aid package that fills in that $40,000. Rarely does that happen. That would be at schools that meet 100% of demonstrated need. That may be terminology that you hear as you are listening to college representatives or going out on college visits. Keep in mind that what they mean when they say meet 100% of demonstrated need is they're still expecting you to handle all of your EFC. They are going to take the rest of that and meet 100% of that. Again, that is not common. What is far more common is that of that fictional $40,000, they may come up with a financial aid package that is $30,000 or $35,000, and then the remaining $5,000 or $10,000 still shifts back to you as what's called the gap in your financial aid. That financial aid package that a college is going to provide will be comprised of a variety of pieces. Could be anything from scholarships, grants, loans, and work study. And if you look at that sort of image on the top right, underneath that big umbrella of financial aid, you see gift aid on the left, which is that grants, scholarship, merit aid. So scholarships and merit aid really are just about the same thing. Grants are often more need-based. So on the other side of the slide, where they show work study and loans, that is really sort of what I would consider to be, I would consider grants to be need aid as well. Work study and loans as well are going to be based on demonstrated need as opposed to merit. I would consider them to be sort of contingency based. So it depends on sort of whether or not you would qualify for grants, work study, or loans. that is the big umbrella of financial aid as it is provided by each institution or by each college or university. There are obviously other mechanisms to gain scholarships, and we've listed a few of them here, the Adams and Koplik Scholarship. We should be getting more information about that shortly and sharing that with students who qualify. Those are the scholarships that are based upon MCAS scores if a student chose to take MCAS, because we know that for our seniors, and much of the MCAS was entirely optional. And while some students took it, others did not. Those that do qualify for Adams or maybe eligible for Koplik will be notified as we go through the year. We also have additional local scholarships. So each year, we are very fortunate that the community supports Franklin High School in the way that it does. We will be making students and families aware of local scholarships. Those are things that are only available to our high school students and get awarded at our honors night that is typically held in May. More information on that will be coming. And then certainly there are national scholarships. As we become aware of those, we share them with students through Naviance. We do update that yearly, year-round, I should say. Students may also choose to do some of their own searching as it relates to scholarships, and we've got a couple of links in the upcoming slide that hit upon that. I mentioned, so that was just about enough information, perhaps for us all to be dangerous out there. So if you are looking to hear from a true financial aid expert, and these are financial aid representatives from colleges and universities in the area, there are webinars that they offer throughout the fall where they will be able to describe in greater detail not only the types of aid, but also the factors that are considered and how colleges determine how much aid to offer. Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority is a state agency that is highly reputable, a fantastic resource. They have webinars not only on financial aid, but also on some of the college admissions pieces as well. So I would strongly encourage you to head over to their website, find a webinar that works for your schedule. We've got a few of the most upcoming ones listed there, but they do continue on into the fall and winter. So we would strongly encourage you to take advantage of that opportunity. Coming upon the last couple of slides, some links. So that FAFSA, I just want to point out again, the FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. First word is free. Please don't ever pay to file the FAFSA. It is a free form. It is perhaps from anyone who is involved filling out the FAFSA maybe in their own education earlier on. It used to be quite a daunting form. There are now opportunities to link directly to your tax return and have it auto-populate many of the fields. To have that be as seamless and a process as possible, it would be ideal if you got an FSA ID, formerly known as a FAFSA PIN. So if you registered for an FSA ID prior to completing the FAFSA, that will make the process all the more expeditious and seamless for you. So I would encourage you to do that. As I mentioned, that CSS profile link there, you should head over to that site and check and see if any of the schools that your student is applying to do require the CSS profile. If they do, you will absolutely need to fill that out. That form does come with a fee, so be prepared for that. There is a one-time processing fee, and then for each school that you send your scores to, there is a fee per school. As a financial aid form, you're entering in your own financial information, and the form is doing calculation in the background. So it is possible that you may qualify for a fee waiver at the end, but there's no way to know that until you go through the form, and whether or not there is a fee waiver or not. If a school requires that form in order to provide a financial aid award, you would certainly want to complete that form. The others are resources, finaid.org, another great resource for you to learn more about the financial aid process. I mentioned some of those calculators where you might go and calculate your own EFC, so you can have some informed conversations with your student as you head into this process. Each college now is required by law to have financial aid estimators on their website. So if it is not readily available, you could certainly contact the college financial aid office and ask where their financial aid estimator is. That is required again by law. Fastweb.com is a reputable scholarship search engine where you could charge your student with, hey, get on there, create a profile, and spend 30 minutes twice a week or whatever their schedule might allow to do some scholarship searching. And then again, I mentioned that MIFA.org is a fantastic resource. Non-financial aid resource, but just other resources for you to have that we've referenced throughout the presentation: Common App, Coalition Application, College Board, and ACT Student for testing. I referenced that NCAA Eligibility Center. That website is there. And then for students who might be looking to learn more about what it would be like to be a college athlete, there are resources as well, including the opportunity to do a search by division, by sport, so that students can maybe shape their final stage of searching around some of their athletic interests, if that's something that they want to do. So at this point, I will maybe hand it back to Heather, but I just, before I do that, just want to thank everybody, myself, obviously, for attending. I know it's a late night. We went a little bit over an hour, but you know, I want to say too that I'm very proud to work in this department, and I appreciate all the work that the other panelists have done, as well as the 4 other counselors who are not here tonight, but will be doing a similar presentation for junior parents in just a couple of months, as you may remember, just about a year ago. So I think we can, and you as parents should feel proud to have a department that works tirelessly and has more than 80 years of combined experience. We take working with your students very, very seriously, and we are committed to being a resource for whatever they might need, whether it is college, other plans that they might have after high school, or whatever it is that they need throughout the year. So again, I feel fortunate to work in this community, and just want to thank everybody for being on the presentation this evening. Thanks, Heather.
Wow, steal my thunder, Dave. Thanks. That was a great way to close it out. Yeah, I echo everything he said. We're here to support you and your son or daughter, and please reach out with any questions that you might have. I cannot see the chat. I do see there's the handful of perhaps questions in the chat, and I know Kate has been diligently writing those down. So after tonight, we'll regroup probably in the morning and look at what some of those questions were. We also offer an opportunity for you to fill out the form that is linked here, should any other questions arise. We did email the presentation, I believe this morning it went out, just maybe around 9:30, so you should have a copy in your emails. Additionally, we will post it to the website, and once we compile the question and answers, we will do that as well. If the opportunity for filling out that form goes by and you don't have a chance, again, just reach out to your son or daughter's guidance counselor, and we're happy to communicate via phone, in person, virtually, whatever works for you. So on that note, thanks again for joining us, and be in touch if you have questions. Take care.